Creative cognition and brain network dynamics. This section delves into the intricate relationship between creative cognition and brain network dynamics, shedding light on the neural mechanisms underlying various creative tasks. It emphasizes the importance of understanding the roles of cognitive control and self-generated thought in the creative process, aiming to unravel the mysteries of how the brain produces creative thought. One of the central themes explored in this section is the definition of creativity, therefore, which is broadly conceptualized as the generation of novel and useful ideas. Creative cognition encompasses mental processes that support the generation and evaluation of such ideas across diverse domains, including the arts, sciences, and everyday life. Some recent advancements in functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is also known as the fMRI, research have provided valuable insights into the neural substrates of creative cognition. Studies have revealed a consistent pattern of brain activity and connectivity across a range of creative tasks. This starts from divergent thinking to musical improvisation to poetry composition, as well as visual arts. These findings suggest that creative thought involves dynamic interactions among a lot of large-scale brain systems, with in particular emphasis on the cooperation between the default and executive control networks. In this case, the default network, comprising midline and posterior inferior parietal regions, is associated with spontaneous and self-generated thought. This includes mind-wandering, mental stimulation, and autobiographical retrieval. On the other hand, the executive control network consists of lateral, prefrontal, and anterior inferior parietal regions. This is implicated in externally directed attention and cognitive processes, which therefore require goal-directed processing. Traditionally, these networks were thought to exhibit an anti-diagnostic relationship with the default network. This therefore becoming active when the mind is at rest and the executive control network engages during cognitive tasks. However, in recent research, this has shown that these networks can cooperate during creative cognition and artistic performance, therefore challenging previous assumptions about their functional segregation. All in all, this section discusses several studies that have investigated brain network interaction during creative tasks. For example, in studies of musical improvisation, professional pianists were found to engage both the default and executive control networks, therefore depending on specific cognitive strategies which are employed during improvisation tasks. Similarly, studies of poetry composition and visual art have revealed a lot of dynamic interactions between these given networks, particularly during the idea generation and evaluation process. Understanding how the brain produces creative thought. This section basically investigates the neuroscience of creative cognition, which therefore specifically focuses on the roles of cognitive control and self-generated thought. The research therefore aims to understand how the brain produces this creative thought by examining brain activity and connectivity patterns during various creative tasks, such as divergent thinking, musical improvisation, poetry composition, and visual art. The hypothesis of this study, the primary hypothesis is that the creative thought involves dynamic interactions between large-scale brain systems. In particular, the default network associated with spontaneous thought and the executive control network are implicated in direct attention and cognitive regulation. The researchers predict that these networks, previously considered to have an antagonistic relationship with will therefore cooperate during creative cognition. The methods used in the study employs the fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to assess brain activity and functional alternate uses like divergent thinking, musical improvisation, poetry composition, and visual art creation. The fMRI data are analyzed, therefore using various techniques, including whole brain functional connectivity analysis and seed-based analyses to identify brain networks involved in creative cognition. The results therefore revealed consistent patterns of brain activity and connectivity across different creative tasks. Specifically, the default and executive control network show increased coupling during creative tasks, indicating cooperation rather than antagonism. For example, during a musical improvisation, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, a key region of the executive control network, exhibits increased connectivity with both motor regions and default network regions, therefore depending on the task goal. Example of this would be using specific pitch sets versus expressing emotions. Similarly, during poetry, composition, and visual art creation, the default and control networks show increased coupling during the idea evaluation, suggesting collaboration in the process of refining and evaluating creative tasks. Therefore shown in the graph, and the activation of the networks that is listed in B of the image are basically just where and how the brain is activating. In conclusion, the study concludes that creative cognition involves dynamic interactions between the default and control networks, challenging the previous notion of their antagonistic relationship. The findings suggest that creative thought requires both spontaneous generative processes mediated by the default network and strategic cognitive control mechanisms mediated by the executive control network. This nuanced understanding of the brain network dynamics sheds light on the neural mechanisms underlying creativity and has implications for interventions aimed at fostering creative abilities. Additionally, the study highlights the importance of considering both domain general and domain specific aspects of creative cognition, especially in future research. Key findings and implications. Some key findings that I ended up noticing throughout the study were cooperation of default and control networks. Contrary to previous assumptions of the antagonism, the default and executive control networks were found to cooperate during creative cognition. This cooperation facilitated goal-directed, self-generated thought processes essential for creativity. Number 2, dynamic interactions. The brain regions involved in idea generation and evaluation exhibited dynamic interactions during creative tasks. Default network regions contributed to generating candidate ideas, while control network regions evaluated and modified these ideas to meet task-specific goals. And then lastly, domain-specific and domain general creativity. The study, it basically explored both domain general creativity, which is divergent thinking, and domain specific creativity, which is the musical improvisation and the poetry composition. And similar patterns of brain network interactions were observed across diverse creative domains. Some implications of this study that I noticed were: 1, the role of cognitive control. In this, the study highlights the importance of the cognitive control in creative cognitions. By elucidating the interplay between default and control networks, researchers gain a better understanding of how cognitive control influences creative processes. The second one, future direction, which future researchers could further therefore explain and explore brain network dynamics and creativity, particularly focusing on the role of memory systems and the extent of cognitive control involvement in different creative tasks. This could lead to a deeper understanding of the neural basis of creativity and its implications for cognitive neuroscience. And lastly, the role of cognitive control. The role of cognitive control study highlights And lastly, understanding brain network dynamics. The understanding of brain network dynamics is basically the findings provided insight into large-scale brain systems. and interact to support complex cognitive processes, particularly those involving creative thought. This understanding could inform interventions and aim at fostering creative abilities. Again, overall, the findings suggest that creative thought involves a balance between spontaneous, internally focused processes driven by the default network and goal-directed, externally directed processes mediated by the executive control network. This nuanced understanding of the brain network dynamics during creative cognition has important implications for interventions aimed at fostering creative abilities and deepening our understanding of the complex interplay between cognitive control and spontaneous ideation in creative tasks.